You wake up with a weight you can't explain. Not something visible, not something you can hold, but something that quietly sits on your chest, tightening with every thought, every memory, every what if your mind refuses to let go of. And before your feet even touch the ground, your day has already begun inside your head, replaying conversations that are long over, predicting problems that don't yet exist, questioning your worth, your choices, your place in the world, and somewhere in that noise, you start to wonder, how did it get this loud? And why does it feel like you're the only one who can't turn it off? And maybe you've tried. You've tried distracting yourself, staying busy, telling yourself to calm down, to stop overthinking, to just let it go. But the more you fight it, the stronger it seems to come back, like a tide that refuses to recede, pulling you deeper into emotional chaos, into self-doubt, into that exhausting cycle where you feel everything too much and yet understand nothing clearly. And the truth is, it's not just the world around you that feels overwhelming. It's your own mind, your own reactions, your own patterns that seem to betray you at the worst possible moments. You feel deeply, you care deeply, you think deeply, but instead of that being your strength, it has become your burden, turning small moments into heavy storms, turning silence into rejection, turning uncertainty into anxiety, and slowly, without realizing it, you've given your peace away to people, to outcomes, to things you cannot control. And now you're left trying to gather the pieces of yourself from places they were never meant to be scattered. But what if I told you this isn't who you are? What if this constant overthinking, this emotional overwhelm, this need to control everything, to understand everything, to feel everything? What if it's not your identity, but a pattern you've practiced for so long that it feels like truth? Because somewhere along the way, you learn to hold on too tightly to thoughts, to people, to outcomes, believing that if you just thought harder, cared more, tried better, you could finally feel safe, finally feel in control, finally feel at peace. But instead, you've become trapped in your own mind, reacting instead of choosing, absorbing instead of protecting, chasing clarity instead of creating it. And right here, in this moment, something begins to shift, because you're starting to see it. You're starting to realize that not every thought deserves your attention. Not every emotion deserves your reaction. Not every person deserves access to your energy. And most importantly, not everything that happens deserves the power to disturb your inner world. This journey you're about to step into isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming powerful within your emotions. It's about learning how to detach without becoming cold, how to care without losing yourself, how to think without spiraling, how to feel without drowning. It's about reclaiming control, not over life, not over people, but over your response, your perspective, your inner state. Because the moment you stop letting everything affect you is the moment you start truly living. And if something inside you is already resonating, if a part of you knows it's time to break free from this cycle, to quiet the noise, to finally feel steady within yourself, then before we go deeper into this journey together, take a second to like this audiobook and press subscribe, so this message can reach others who are silently struggling just like you, and so you don't miss what might be the turning point you've been searching for. Now, take a breath, plug in your headphone, because this is where everything begins to change. And as you sit with that first shift, that quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to feel everything so intensely, something deeper begins to surface. Because if your reactions aren't the truth, if your emotions aren't your identity, then the real question becomes, why does it feel like they are? I'll tell you something most people won't say out loud. The reason you feel everything so deeply isn't because you're weak. It's because somewhere along the way, you became hyper-aware, hyper-attuned, hyper-responsible for things that were never yours to carry. And now your mind and your emotions are working overtime. trying to protect a version of you that learned survival before it ever learned peace. You notice everything, don't you? The shift in someone's tone, the delay in their reply, the energy in a room that no one else seems to pick up on. And while others move on effortlessly, you stay there, analyzing, replaying, questioning, wondering what changed, what you did wrong, what you could have done better, and without realizing it, you start turning moments into meanings and meanings into stories. And those stories slowly begin shaping how you see yourself. I've been there, where a simple sentence from someone could echo in my mind for hours, sometimes days, not because it was loud, but because it meant something to me, or at least, I believed it did, and that's where it begins, not in the moment itself, but in the meaning you attach to it. Because when you feel deeply, you don't just experience life, you absorb it. And absorption without boundaries becomes exhaustion. You start carrying emotions that don't belong to you, feeling responsible for how others feel, adjusting yourself to keep the peace, overextending, overgiving, overthinking, until one day, you're not even sure where you end and everyone else begins. And what makes it heavier is that part of you believes this is who you are, that you're just too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But listen to me carefully, you're not too much. You've just never been taught where to draw the line between feeling and losing yourself in what you feel. Because there's a difference, a powerful difference, between experiencing emotions and being controlled by them. And right now, your mind has been trained, conditioned, to react before it reflects, to assume before it understands, to spiral before it pauses, and the more you follow that pattern, the stronger it becomes. That's why a small misunderstanding can feel like rejection. That's why silence can feel like abandonment. That's why uncertainty feels like danger. Because your mind is not responding to the present moment. It's reacting from accumulated memory, from past experiences that quietly whisper, "This feels familiar. Be careful." And so you stay alert, constantly scanning, constantly thinking, constantly trying to predict what might go wrong, believing that if you just stay one step ahead, you'll finally feel safe. But the truth is, this constant awareness isn't protecting you anymore. It's draining you, because you were never meant to carry the emotional weight of everything around you. You were never meant to decode every expression, every pause, every possibility. And yet, you do it automatically. Not because you want to suffer, but because your mind learned that control equals safety, and overthinking feels like control. But here's the shift, the one that begins to change everything. Overthinking is not control. It's an illusion of control. Because no matter how many times you replay something, you can't change what already happened. No matter how many scenarios you create, you can't predict what hasn't happened yet. And no matter how deeply you feel something, it doesn't always mean it's true. Let that sink in. Not every thought you have is a fact. Not every emotion you feel is a signal you must act on. Sometimes, it's just your mind doing what it has practiced for years. And if it was learned, it can be unlearned. But that begins with awareness. Real awareness. The kind where you pause, and instead of diving into the thought, you observe it. Instead of becoming the emotion, you notice it. I feel anxious becomes, I notice anxiety. I'm not enough becomes, I'm having a thought that I'm not enough. And in that small shift, something powerful happens. You create space. Space between you and what you feel. Space between you and what you think. And in that space is where your freedom lives. Because you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the one experiencing them. And the more you practice seeing that, the less control they have over you. And as that control loosens, something unexpected begins to happen. You stop reacting to everything. You stop taking everything personally. You stop needing to understand everything immediately. And slowly, you begin to feel lighter. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you're no longer carrying it all inside your head. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you realize you don't have to feel everything to this extent to be real. You don't have to think about everything to be prepared. You don't have to carry everything to be worthy. And as that realization settles in, gently, quietly, you begin to meet yourself, not as someone broken, but as someone who is finally learning how to be free. And just when you begin to feel that space, that slight distance between you and your thoughts, something uncomfortable rises to the surface, something honest, something almost confronting, because it's not just certain people that trigger you. It's everything, isn't it? I see it clearly now, and maybe you're starting to see it too. It's not only the harsh words or the obvious conflicts that shake you. It's the unanswered messages, the subtle changes in behavior, the uncertainty of outcomes, the pressure of expectations, the noise of the world, the opinions you didn't ask for, the comparisons you didn't intend to make. It's the randomness of life itself that feels like it's constantly pressing against your mind, asking for a reaction, demanding your attention, pulling you out of your center. You try to manage it by fixing the outside, by hoping people will be clearer, kinder, more consistent, by wishing situations would unfold the way you expect, by trying to organize chaos into something predictable. But the truth keeps revealing itself in quiet moments. You cannot control everything, and the more you try, the more restless you become. I used to believe that if I could just surround myself with the right people, avoid the wrong situations, plan everything perfectly, then maybe, just maybe, I would finally feel at ease. But reality doesn't bend that way, does it? People change, situations shift, life interrupts without warning, and suddenly you're left facing the same internal storm, just wearing a different disguise. Which is when it hits you, the problem was never just them. It's the way everything passes through you. Every word becomes a reflection of your worth. Every situation becomes a test of your stability. Every delay becomes a question about your value. Every silence becomes a story your mind writes without permission, and before you know it, you're not living life. You're interpreting it, constantly decoding, constantly reacting, constantly trying to make sense of things that were never meant to be dissected so deeply. There's a subtle exhaustion in that, a quiet kind that doesn't always show on the outside, but you feel it when your mind refuses to rest, when your chest feels tight without reason, when even peaceful moments are interrupted by unnecessary thoughts, because it's not just external noise anymore, it's internal habit. You've trained yourself to engage with everything, to give meaning to everything, to feel responsible for everything. And that's where the weight truly comes from. Because when everything matters, nothing feels stable. When everything affects you, you lose your sense of ground. When everything becomes personal, peace becomes impossible. So the shift you're being invited into now is deeper than just handling difficult people. It's about how you relate to life itself. I want you to consider something that might feel uncomfortable at first. Not everything deserves your emotional investment. Not every situation needs your analysis. Not every person deserves your understanding. Not every outcome defines you. There is a discipline in choosing what you allow into your inner world. A quiet strength in deciding this stops here. Because emotional resilience isn't about becoming distant from life. It's about becoming selective with your energy. It's about recognizing that just because something happens around you doesn't mean it has to happen within you. And I know, part of you resists that. Part of you says, but if I don't think about it, I'll miss something. If I don't care, I'll become careless. If I don't react, I'll lose control. But look at what holding on so tightly has been doing to you. Look at how much of your peace has been traded for temporary control. Look at how often your mind runs ahead of reality, creating problems that don't even exist yet. This isn't awareness anymore. This is overengagement. And overengagement is the silent form of self-sabotage. Because while you're trying to manage everything outside, you're losing connection with what's inside. Your breath becomes shallow. Your thoughts become loud. Your sense of self becomes dependent on how things go, dependent on how people act, dependent on outcomes you cannot guarantee. And that's where the real loss happens, not in what others do, but in how far you drift away from yourself. So now, something different begins to emerge. A quieter approach, a stronger one. You start noticing the urge to react, but you don't immediately follow it. You feel the pull to overthink, but you let the thought pass instead of chasing it. You sense the discomfort of uncertainty, but you allow it to exist without forcing an answer. And in those small moments, you begin to reclaim control, not over everything, but over the only thing that was ever yours, your response. Because life will continue to be unpredictable. People will continue to be imperfect. Situations will continue to shift. But you don't have to move with every wave. You don't have to absorb every impact. You don't have to turn every moment into a meaning about yourself. And as that understanding settles in, not loudly, not all at once, but gently, like a quiet realization that finally feels true, you begin to experience something new. Not because the world has changed, but because you are no longer letting everything become your world. What if the real prison you're living in has no walls, no guards, no locks? Yet it still controls where your mind goes, how your emotions react, and how your life unfolds. I know this prison well, because for years I lived inside it without realizing it existed. It looked harmless from the outside. It looked like thinking, analyzing, trying to understand people, situations, mistakes, possibilities. But slowly I began to notice something unsettling. The more I tried to think my way to peace, the further peace moved away from me. Every thought opened the door to 10 more thoughts. Every attempt to solve my anxiety created new reasons to worry. My mind wasn't solving problems. It was manufacturing them. You might know this feeling too. You replay conversations hours after they happen. You analyze someone's tone of voice. You wonder if you said the wrong thing. You imagine scenarios that have not happened yet, and somehow your body reacts as if they already have. Your heart beats faster. Your stomach tightens. Your mind scans for danger that might not even exist. This audiobook journey begins inside that exact moment. The moment when you realize your own mind has become the loudest voice in the room. I remember lying awake at night with thoughts racing so fast it felt impossible to shut them off. The strange part was that my mind insisted it was helping me. It whispered, "If you think about this long enough, you'll figure it out. You'll gain control. You'll avoid pain." But what it never admitted was the cost. Every loop stole my attention from the present moment. Every scenario pulled me deeper into a future that might never exist. Over time, I began to see the pattern clearly. Overthinking pretends to be problem-solving, but it's actually fear wearing a clever disguise. It convinces you that more thinking equals more control. In reality, it quietly erodes your clarity. The truth that changed everything for me, and the truth this audiobook keeps returning to, is simple but uncomfortable. Not every thought deserves your attention. Yet the mind doesn't like uncertainty. It hates unanswered questions. So when something feels unclear, it fills the silence with stories. Maybe someone didn't reply to your message. Instantly the mind creates a narrative. Maybe they're upset. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe they're losing interest. One small gap becomes a storm of possibilities. The more attention you give these thoughts, the stronger they become. They form mental loops. And once those loops begin spinning, your emotions follow them. That's when anxiety enters. Anxiety is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and persistent, like a background hum in your nervous system. You walk through your day functioning normally, but inside your mind something keeps replaying. Something keeps predicting danger. I used to believe anxiety meant something was wrong with me. Now I see it differently. Anxiety is often the result of a mind that has been trained to overprotect itself. At some point in life, through rejection, disappointment, heartbreak, or pressure, your brain learned that thinking ahead might keep you safe. It started scanning for problems before they even existed. But here's the twist. The same system designed to protect you can trap you. Because the brain does not always know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. When you replay an argument in your head, Your body releases stress chemicals as if the argument is happening again. When you imagine rejection, your nervous system reacts as if rejection already occurred. That is the moment when the thought prison begins to build itself. Brick by brick, the mind constructs invisible walls. One belief becomes another. What if I fail? Becomes, I'm probably not good enough. Why didn't they respond? Becomes, people always leave. Soon those thoughts stop feeling like guesses. They feel like facts. But they are not facts. They are interpretations. The moment you begin to see that distinction, the moment you realize your thoughts are not always reality, something powerful happens. Space appears. And in that space, you regain something most overthinkers lose without noticing. Choice. You begin to notice that thoughts arrive automatically, but your reaction to them does not have to be automatic. A thought might say, "You embarrassed yourself earlier." Instead of spiraling into hours of self-criticism, you can pause and simply observe it. I notice that my mind is replaying that moment again. That small shift changes everything. Because the moment you become the observer of your thoughts instead of the prisoner of them, the bars begin to loosen. I'm not saying the thoughts disappear immediately. They won't. Minds that have practiced overthinking for years don't suddenly become silent overnight. But something else happens. You stop believing every story your mind tells you. You stop treating every thought as an emergency. You begin to realize that most mental storms lose their power when they are not fed constant attention. And slowly, something remarkable emerges beneath the noise. Clarity. Clarity reveals that many of the things you worried about never happened. It shows you how much time your mind spent preparing for battles that never arrived. It reminds you that your life was unfolding while your thoughts were busy predicting it. This realization can feel both liberating and painful. Liberating because you see a way out. Painful because you realize how many moments were stolen by thoughts that never deserved your energy. But here is the quiet truth waiting beneath that realization. Your mind created the prison, which means your awareness can dismantle it. Not by fighting every thought. Not by forcing positivity, but by seeing clearly, by noticing the loops as they begin, by understanding that a thought is simply a mental event, not a command you must obey. And as that awareness grows, the mind slowly learns a new pattern. It learns that silence is safe. It learns that uncertainty is survivable. It learns that peace does not come from controlling every thought, but from choosing which thoughts deserve to stay. That is the beginning of freedom, not the dramatic kind that arrives overnight, but the quiet kind that unfolds in small moments. The moment you catch yourself overthinking and gently return to the present. The moment you stop chasing someone's approval. The moment you allow a thought to pass without turning it into a story. Each of those moments weakens the prison. And with every step forward, you begin to rediscover something that was never truly lost. Your ability to live outside the loops of your own mind. Suddenly it hits you. What if the problem was never the situation, the people, or the past you keep replaying, but the size of the lens through which you've been looking at your life? I remember the exact moment this realization began forming inside me. The moment I stepped back from my own thoughts long enough to see something unsettling yet strangely liberating. That the mind has a way of shrinking the universe down to the size of its worries. When you're trapped inside overthinking, every unanswered message feels like rejection, every mistake feels like failure, every awkward moment feels like a permanent scar on your identity. Yet when I slowly pulled my awareness away from those microscopic concerns, something astonishing appeared: perspective. You begin to see how easily the mind exaggerates what is small while ignoring what is vast. How a single uncomfortable moment can dominate your entire day, while the miracle of being alive quietly fades into the background. That realization is not comfortable at first because it forces you to confront how much time you have spent living inside mental storms that never deserved that power. I've watched my own mind create drama out of silence. Tension out of uncertainty, fear out of imagination. I've seen how quickly your nervous system reacts when a situation doesn't unfold according to the story you expected. The illusion of control breaks. Anxiety fills the gap. The mind scrambles to fix what was never broken. You convince yourself that if you analyze everything long enough, you'll finally understand it. Yet all you really create is another loop of thoughts chasing each other through the corridors of your head. That's when the deeper truth begins to whisper, something most overthinkers struggle to accept. The world is far bigger than the narrative inside your mind. As I continue speaking through this audiobook experience with you, I want you to imagine stepping outside your own mental noise for just a moment, almost as if you were observing your life from a distance high above the chaos of everyday thinking. From that distance, the problems that once felt overwhelming begin to change shape. The argument you replayed all night suddenly becomes a brief moment in a lifetime of experiences. The person whose approval you chased for years becomes one individual among billions of human stories unfolding across the planet. Your mistakes shrink into lessons instead of permanent labels attached to your identity. Perspective has this quiet power. It rearranges the importance of things without forcing you to deny your emotions. When I started to truly see my life from this wider angle, something unexpected happened. I noticed how many moments I had missed because my mind was somewhere else. You might recognize this feeling too. Sitting with people you love while your thoughts replay a conversation from earlier, walking through beautiful places while your mind argues with imaginary versions of someone who isn't even present, living entire experiences while mentally preparing for problems that never arrive. The mind loves to travel through time, visiting the past to relive pain or rushing into the future to rehearse fear. Yet peace only exists in the narrow doorway called now. Once you recognize this pattern, you begin reclaiming control in a completely different way than you once imagined. Control stops meaning controlling people, outcomes, or external events. Real control becomes the discipline of where you place your attention. You begin noticing when your mind tries to drag you back into mental loops, gently bringing your awareness back to what is actually happening around you. You learn the subtle difference between reacting automatically and responding consciously. This is where emotional resilience quietly grows, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through small decisions repeated day after day. That shift naturally changes how you relate to other people as well. When you understand the bigger perspective, you stop taking every behavior personally. Someone's rejection no longer defines your worth because you recognize that their actions come from their own fears, wounds, experiences, and limitations. Their choices belong to their story, not your identity. That realization alone can dissolve years of self-doubt because it returns your emotional independence back to where it always belonged, inside you. With that independence comes something equally important: boundaries. For a long time, I believed caring deeply meant tolerating everything, absorbing everyone's emotions, carrying the weight of other people's expectations like it was my responsibility to fix their storms. Eventually, I understood something that changed the way I move through relationships. Empathy without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. When you finally respect your own peace enough to protect it, toxic dynamics begin to lose their grip on you. You no longer argue endlessly with people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer over-explain your growth to those who feel threatened by it. Detachment stops feeling cold. It becomes clarity. Clarity also reveals the role your own ego quietly plays in suffering. The ego wants to be right, wants to be liked, wants to win every emotional battle. It whispers that you must defend your image at all costs. Yet when you look at life from the wider perspective, you see how exhausting that performance has always been. Letting go of that constant need for validation feels like dropping armor you never needed to wear. Your energy returns. Your thoughts slow down. Your reactions soften. This is where true inner peace begins forming, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your relationship with life transforms. You stop resisting every uncomfortable feeling. You allow emotions to pass through without building stories around them. You forgive people who may never apologize, not because they deserve it, but because your freedom matters more than carrying resentment. Healing becomes less about fixing the past and more about refusing to relive it every day through thought patterns that keep reopening the same wounds. Eventually, something remarkable begins to unfold inside you. The same mind that once trapped you in endless analysis becomes quieter, steadier, more disciplined. Mental strength grows not from suppressing emotion, but from understanding it. You recognize fear without letting it dictate your choices. You recognize sadness without assuming it defines your future. You recognize uncertainty without needing to solve every unknown before taking a step forward. From that place, life begins to feel different. Not perfect, not controlled, but deeply alive. You start noticing simple things again. The quiet relief of a calm breath, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the feeling of your own mind finally slowing down after years of racing ahead. These small moments become anchors that keep pulling you back to the present. Then one day you realize something quietly profound. The bigger perspective you were searching for was never far away. It was waiting for the moment you stopped shrinking your life to the size of your fears and allowed your awareness to expand wide enough to hold the entire experience of being human. Just when you begin to see life from that wider perspective, another realization quietly steps forward, one that most of us resist at first because it touches the very foundation of how we try to survive in an uncertain world. I remember the moment it hit me with unsettling clarity. So much of my anxiety was not coming from what was happening around me, but from my desperate attempt to control what could never truly be controlled. For years, I believed that if I thought harder, planned better, predicted every possible outcome, I could somehow protect myself from disappointment, rejection, or chaos. The mind framed it as responsibility, as intelligence, as preparation. Yet the deeper I looked, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Most of my overthinking was not wisdom. It was fear disguised as strategy. As this realization began unfolding through this audiobook journey with you, I started noticing how subtly the illusion of control sneaks into everyday moments. You feel it when you rehearse conversations before they happen, hoping to influence how someone will respond. You feel it when you replay mistakes repeatedly, as if analyzing them enough times will somehow rewrite the past. You feel it when your mind races ahead into the future, constructing dozens of possible outcomes just to feel prepared. Your thoughts tell you this constant mental effort will give you control over life. Yet the strange truth is that the harder you grip life, the more tension you create inside yourself. I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that my mind was addicted to certainty. It wanted guarantees in a world built entirely on unpredictability. It wanted every relationship to behave according to expectations. It wanted every decision to lead to clear results. Yet life has never operated like that. People change. Situations shift. Opportunities appear where you never expected them. Loss arrives without warning. The mind resists this unpredictability because uncertainty feels dangerous. It begins trying to build invisible walls around every possibility, trying to plan life into submission. What I slowly began to understand is that control was never meant to exist in the places I kept searching for it. You cannot control someone's feelings toward you. You cannot control whether people understand your intentions. You cannot control how quickly healing happens or how long certain chapters of life last. The exhausting part is that many of us spend years fighting these realities, believing if we just try harder, analyze deeper, worry longer, we might finally bend the world to our expectations. But something remarkable happens the moment you stop trying to control everything outside you. Your attention returns to the only place real influence has ever existed, your inner world. I began noticing how powerful it felt to redirect my energy away from controlling events toward controlling my reactions. A situation might still be uncertain. A person might still behave unpredictably. A result might still remain unknown. Yet my response to those circumstances suddenly became a space where discipline could grow. Instead of reacting immediately through anxiety, frustration, or self-blame, I started pausing long enough to watch my own emotional patterns unfold. That pause may seem small, yet it changes everything. Within that pause, you realize something your mind rarely admits. Most suffering does not come directly from events themselves, but from the stories your mind attaches to those events. A delayed reply becomes, "They don't care about me." A criticism becomes, "I'm not good enough." A setback becomes, "My future is ruined." The event is one moment. The interpretation becomes a mental storm that can last days, weeks, sometimes years. Learning to question those interpretations is where emotional intelligence quietly begins to reshape your identity. You stop assuming every thought is truth. You stop reacting to every emotional wave as if it demands immediate action. Instead, you begin observing your inner reactions with curiosity rather than judgment. From that place of awareness, another shift begins forming. The need to control people slowly loosens its grip. I remember realizing how often I tried to manage relationships by adjusting myself constantly, hoping to maintain approval. I thought if I explained myself perfectly, behaved carefully, avoided conflict, everyone would stay. Yet life eventually revealed a painful but freeing lesson. People who want to misunderstand you will find reasons no matter how clearly you communicate. That realization forced me to confront the role of boundaries in emotional freedom. Boundaries are not walls built to punish others. They are quiet declarations of self-respect. They protect your mental clarity from environments that thrive on chaos, manipulation, or constant emotional drama. When you stop trying to control how people behave, you start focusing on whether their presence aligns with the peace you are learning to build within yourself. At first, this shift can feel unsettling, especially for people who have spent years seeking validation. The ego whispers that detaching from approval means losing connection. Yet the opposite often happens. When you no longer chase validation, your relationships become more honest. You stop performing. You stop pretending to be someone who never disappoints, never disagrees, never changes. Authenticity replaces the exhausting need to be accepted by everyone. That authenticity brings another quiet transformation. Forgiveness begins to emerge more naturally. When you stop trying to control how the past should have unfolded, resentment slowly dissolves. You realize how many emotional chains were tied to the belief that life owed you different outcomes. Letting go does not mean pretending pain never existed. It means releasing the expectation that the past must look different before you allow yourself to move forward. Through this process, something inside you becomes steadier. The same uncertainty that once triggered anxiety now begins to feel like open space. Possibility replaces fear. The mind stops racing quite as often because it finally understands that not every unknown needs to be solved immediately. You begin noticing how calm your inner world becomes when you stop wrestling with life's unpredictability. Instead of forcing clarity from the future, you start creating clarity in the present moment through awareness, discipline, and emotional responsibility. Each moment becomes an opportunity to practice responding instead of reacting. Over time, that practice shapes a new identity within you. Not someone who controls everything around them, but someone who stands steady regardless of what unfolds. Someone who recognizes their emotions without becoming ruled by them. Someone who can walk through uncertainty with quiet confidence rather than frantic mental preparation. Eventually, you realize the illusion of control was never protecting you at all. It was exhausting you. The moment you loosen that grip, life begins moving again. Thoughts slow down. Your breathing deepens. Your attention returns to the experience of living instead of the endless task of managing it. Then, almost without noticing, you find yourself standing in a place that once felt impossible, a mind that still thinks, still feels deeply, yet no longer tries to imprison the future just to feel safe in the present. Just when you start loosening your grip on control, something else quietly reveals itself beneath the surface, a deeper motive hiding inside many of your reactions. I noticed it the moment I stopped blaming situations for my stress. Beneath the urge to control outcomes was another force entirely, the quiet, persistent need to prove something. To prove I was right. To prove I was worthy. To prove I could not be dismissed or ignored. Suddenly, it became clear that many of the battles my mind fought had nothing to do with truth or peace. They had everything to do with winning. I remember recognizing this pattern while reflecting during this audiobook journey, noticing how rejection had shaped far more of my thinking than I ever admitted to myself. You might recognize it too. Someone questions your opinion, your mind immediately builds arguments to defend it. Someone pulls away emotionally. Your thoughts begin racing to understand why. Someone criticizes you. Your ego quietly demands redemption. What appears on the surface as problem-solving often hides something deeper, the instinct to reclaim control over how you are perceived. That instinct usually begins long before we are conscious of it. At some point in life, most of us experience rejection in a way that leaves a mark on our identity. It might be a relationship that ended unexpectedly, a friendship that faded without explanation, a moment when your voice was dismissed or your effort went unnoticed. The mind absorbs those experiences like evidence. It begins constructing a subtle belief system around them. The belief whispers something dangerous. Rejection must be avoided at all costs. Once that belief forms, your behavior begins to shift without you even realizing it. You start monitoring how people react to you more carefully. You analyze their tone, their silence, their distance. If you sense approval, the mind relaxes. If you sense rejection, the mind goes to work immediately. It searches for strategies to regain control over the situation. Sometimes that strategy is over-explaining. Sometimes it is defending yourself. Sometimes it is mentally arguing with someone long after the conversation has ended. Underneath all of this activity lies the hidden desire to win. Winning might look different depending on the situation. It might mean proving you were right in an argument. It might mean convincing someone to stay in your life. It might mean making sure the person who rejected you eventually realizes your value. The ego quietly frames these victories as justice, yet what it rarely admits is how exhausting that endless competition becomes. I started noticing how many conversations inside my own head were actually debates with people who were not even present anymore. My mind would replay past moments, rewriting them so I could deliver the perfect response, the perfect explanation, the perfect comeback that would finally shift the outcome in my favor. Yet those imaginary victories never created peace. They only kept the emotional wound alive. This is where self-awareness begins revealing a difficult truth. The desire to win often keeps you emotionally tied to the very situations you claim you want to move beyond. Every time you revisit the argument in your mind, you reopen the same emotional doorway. Every time you imagine proving someone wrong, you strengthen their invisible influence over your thoughts. Once I saw this pattern clearly, another realization followed. Winning the emotional battle rarely leads to inner peace. In many cases, it prolongs the suffering. Think about how often people stay mentally attached to toxic relationships because they want the other person to finally recognize their value. They want closure, acknowledgement, validation. The mind tells them that once the other person admits they were wrong, everything will feel resolved. Yet life rarely delivers that kind of ending. People move on. Stories remain unfinished. Apologies never arrive. If your peace depends on someone else admitting defeat, you have quietly handed them control over your emotional world. Recognizing this is not meant to make you cynical. It is meant to free you. When you stop measuring your worth by whether you win emotional battles, a completely different form of strength begins to grow. You no longer need to prove your value through arguments or explanations. You no longer feel compelled to correct every misunderstanding about who you are. Instead, you begin focusing on something far more powerful, your own alignment with truth. That alignment creates a shift in how you approach rejection itself. Instead of interpreting rejection as a verdict on your worth, you begin seeing it as information about compatibility. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will resonate with your energy, your perspective, your boundaries. That reality stops feeling like failure once you accept that every human being is navigating life through their own lens of experience. With that acceptance comes a surprising sense of emotional independence. You no longer chase validation from people who cannot offer it. You stop trying to win approval from those committed to misunderstanding you. The need to control their perception slowly fades because you realize something simple yet liberating. Their opinion does not determine your identity. This does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you start caring about your own mental clarity just as much. You learn to recognize when a conversation is no longer about understanding, but about ego defending itself. In those moments, silence becomes a form of wisdom rather than defeat. That silence creates space for a deeper kind of strength to appear. The strength to walk away from arguments that only drain your energy. The strength to release the need for the last word. The strength to accept that some misunderstandings will remain unresolved. Ironically, the moment you stop trying to win every emotional battle is the moment you begin winning the only battle that ever truly mattered, the one for your own peace of mind. As this awareness settles into your daily life, you begin responding to rejection differently. Instead of scrambling to fix it or fight it, you observe it. You allow the feeling to pass through your system without attaching your identity to it. Rejection becomes an experience rather than a definition. Slowly, the mind learns a new pattern. It learns that dignity does not come from defeating others in emotional competitions. It comes from standing firmly within your own values regardless of how others react. That quiet confidence begins transforming how you move through the world. Conversations become lighter. Relationships become clearer. The endless urge to defend yourself begins fading because you realize something profound. The people meant to understand you will not require constant proof. From that place, something remarkable begins unfolding within you. The energy once spent trying to win arguments returns to you. The thoughts once trapped in mental debates grow quieter. Your emotional world begins reorganizing itself around peace rather than validation. Then one day you notice that the old urge to win has softened into something wiser. Instead of fighting to control how others see you, you simply choose how you see yourself, and that choice becomes stronger than any rejection life might place in your path. Then something even more subtle begins to reveal itself once you stop fighting those endless battles for validation. A quiet exhaustion you may have been carrying for years without ever naming it. I remember the moment I truly noticed it. It was not dramatic. It was not a breaking point. It was simply a quiet realization that I felt emotionally heavy all the time, as if I had been carrying invisible weight that did not belong to me. You might recognize that feeling too. The way your mind constantly scans the emotional atmosphere around you. The way you sense tension in a room before anyone says a word. The way someone else's sadness suddenly becomes your responsibility to fix. This audiobook journey eventually led me to a realization that changed how I understood empathy itself. I had spent so much of my life believing that being a caring person meant absorbing everyone else's struggles, trying to solve their problems, trying to ease their pain even when they never asked me to. What I never questioned was the silent cost of that habit. Because the truth is, when you carry everyone's emotional weight, your own inner world slowly disappears beneath the pressure. You might have experienced this without even realizing it. A friend calls you to vent about the same situation again. You listen patiently. You offer advice. You reassure them. Hours later, the conversation ends. Yet somehow the emotional residue stays inside your mind. You replay what they said. You worry about them. You wonder what else you could have done. Meanwhile, your own thoughts, your own needs, your own healing quietly step aside. At first, this behavior feels noble. The mind tells you that being available for everyone proves your kindness, proves your loyalty, proves your worth. Yet beneath that surface lies a deeper pattern most sensitive people rarely question. Many of us learned early in life that being useful made us feel valued. Being the problem solver, the peacemaker, the emotional support system became part of our identity. The problem is that identities built on constant emotional caretaking slowly turned into silent self-abandonment. I began noticing how often I prioritized someone else's feelings over my own peace. If someone was upset, I immediately felt responsible. If someone misunderstood me, I felt pressure to explain myself endlessly until harmony was restored. If someone struggled, I believed it was my role to carry part of that burden. What I did not see at the time was how this habit blurred the boundaries between compassion and responsibility. Compassion allows you to understand someone's pain. Responsibility convinces you that their pain is yours to solve. That difference is small, but life-changing. When you confuse empathy with obligation, your emotional energy slowly drains away. You start feeling overwhelmed by problems that were never yours to begin with. Your mind becomes crowded with other people's stories, other people's fears, other people's decisions. Meanwhile, your own life begins waiting quietly in the background. The shift began for me the moment I asked a simple question I had avoided for years. What happens to my peace when I carry everyone else's weight? The answer was uncomfortable. My mind was rarely calm. My thoughts were constantly occupied with someone else's situation. My emotional state depended heavily on how the people around me were feeling. If they were stressed, I felt stressed. If they were unhappy, I felt responsible. That realization forced me to confront something many empathetic people struggle to accept. Caring deeply about others does not require sacrificing your own emotional stability. Real emotional intelligence recognizes the difference between support and self-erasure. When you begin developing that awareness, boundaries start forming naturally. At first, they may feel unfamiliar. You might worry that protecting your energy makes you selfish. You might feel guilt when you stop solving problems that others must learn to face themselves. Yet something remarkable happens when you allow people to carry their own experiences. They grow. When you stop absorbing every emotional storm around you, people learn to navigate their own weather. They discover their own resilience. They begin developing their own solutions rather than depending on your constant intervention. Meanwhile, something equally important begins happening inside you. Space returns. The mental space once filled with other people's worries slowly clears. Your thoughts become quieter. Your attention returns to your own healing, your own goals, your own emotional growth. You begin noticing how peaceful life feels when your mind is no longer responsible for managing everyone else's emotional landscape. This does not mean you stop caring about people. It means your care becomes healthier. Instead of rescuing others from every discomfort, you offer presence without losing yourself. You listen without absorbing the entire emotional weight of the conversation. You support without abandoning your own boundaries. This shift requires courage because it challenges a belief many of us have carried for years, that our worth comes from how much we do for others. Yet true self-worth does not grow from constant sacrifice. It grows from respecting your own inner balance as much as you respect the needs of others. Once you begin honoring that balance, the relationships around you start changing as well. Some people will respect your boundaries immediately because they value mutual emotional responsibility. Others may resist because they benefited from your unlimited availability. Those reactions reveal something important about the dynamics you have been participating in. The clarity that follows can feel both freeing and unsettling. You begin recognizing which connections were built on genuine mutual care and which ones quietly depended on your willingness to carry more than your share. This awareness becomes another step toward emotional independence. You realize that peace is not found by managing everyone else's struggles. Peace grows when you allow life to unfold without believing it is your responsibility to hold everything together. From that place, your energy begins flowing back into your own life again. Your thoughts become lighter. Your emotional resilience strengthens. The identity that once revolved around fixing others slowly transforms into something healthier. You become someone who cares deeply without losing themselves in the process. And in that quiet transformation, the weight you once carried for everyone else finally begins to lift, leaving behind a mind that feels clearer, steadier, and far more at home within itself. Yet even after the weight begins to lift, another force quietly tries to pull you back into the same exhausting patterns: guilt. Not the loud kind that appears after a mistake, but the subtle kind that whispers whenever you try to protect your own peace. I remember the first time I truly attempted to draw a line in my life. The first moment I decided I could no longer carry everyone's emotional storms as if they were my responsibility. Instead of relief, what arrived first was discomfort. My mind immediately began questioning my decision. Was I being selfish? Was I abandoning someone who needed me? Was I becoming the kind of person I never wanted to be? As I continued reflecting during this audiobook journey with you, I realized something deeply important about guilt. It often appears precisely when you begin doing what is healthy for you. That realization changed the way I understood emotional boundaries completely. Because for many people, especially those who are deeply empathetic, guilt becomes the invisible chain that keeps them trapped in roles they have outgrown. You feel it when you say no to something that drains you. You feel it when you stop answering every message immediately. You feel it when you choose rest instead of solving someone else's crisis. The strange thing about guilt is that it can make you question your own growth. The moment you stop tolerating behavior that once felt normal, your mind starts negotiating with your past identity. That identity might have been the one who always said yes, the one who always showed up, the one who absorbed every emotional demand placed upon them. Changing that pattern feels unfamiliar, almost like stepping into a new version of yourself that the old one does not quite recognize yet. I remember realizing how often guilt had quietly dictated my decisions. There were times when I stayed in conversations that exhausted me simply because I didn't want the other person to feel dismissed. There were moments when I accepted responsibilities that were not mine because refusing them felt uncomfortable. My mind told me that maintaining harmony was more important than maintaining my own balance. What I did not see at the time was how that belief slowly eroded my sense of self. Every time you ignore your own limits to satisfy someone else's expectations, a small message is sent inward. That message says your needs are secondary. Over time, that message becomes part of your identity. You begin believing that your value comes from how much you tolerate rather than how much you respect yourself. The struggle to set boundaries often begins right there. When you first attempt to protect your emotional space, people may react in ways you did not anticipate. Some will respect the change immediately because they understand the importance of mutual respect. Others may resist because your previous openness benefited them. Their disappointment might trigger your guilt again, tempting you to return to old habits just to avoid conflict. This is where mental discipline becomes essential. Setting boundaries does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you begin caring about yourself with the same seriousness you once reserved only for others. That balance may feel unnatural at first because you are retraining patterns that have existed for years. I remember the first time I truly allowed someone to feel disappointed with me without rushing to fix it. It felt uncomfortable. My mind kept suggesting explanations, justifications, ways to smooth over the tension. Yet something inside me recognized that constantly managing other people's emotions had never created real peace. It had only postponed difficult truths. One of those truths is simple yet powerful. You are not responsible for how everyone reacts to your boundaries. You are responsible for communicating them clearly. You are responsible for honoring them consistently. The emotional response someone else has to those limits belongs to their journey, not yours. When this understanding begins to settle into your awareness, guilt starts losing its authority over your decisions. You realize that guilt does not always signal wrongdoing. Sometimes it simply signals that you are doing something new. With time, the act of protecting your peace begins feeling less like a confrontation and more like a quiet commitment to yourself. You start noticing how much clearer your thoughts become when your emotional energy is no longer scattered across countless obligations. Your mind becomes calmer because it is no longer constantly negotiating with its own boundaries. Another transformation begins happening inside your relationships as well. The people who genuinely value you will begin respecting the limits you set because they recognize that healthy connection cannot exist without mutual consideration. The people who resist those limits reveal something equally important. They were comfortable with the version of you that sacrificed too much. Recognizing that difference can feel painful, yet it also creates clarity. Clarity allows you to move forward without resentment. Instead of blaming others for past dynamics, you begin understanding how your own lack of boundaries contributed to those patterns. This awareness does not bring shame. It brings responsibility. Responsibility is powerful because it returns your freedom. You are no longer waiting for others to behave differently before you feel balanced. You are shaping your environment through the choices you make about your time, your energy, your emotional availability. As that awareness deepens, guilt slowly transforms into something far more constructive: self-respect. Self-respect changes the way you walk through the world. You begin speaking more honestly about what you can offer and what you cannot. You stop apologizing for needing rest, space, or time to think. The need to constantly justify your boundaries fades because you realize they are not punishments directed at others. They are protections for the life you are learning to build within yourself. Eventually, you notice something remarkable. The fear that once surrounded boundary setting begins dissolving. Instead of feeling guilty for protecting your peace, you begin feeling grateful for the clarity it creates. Your thoughts grow quieter. Your emotional resilience strengthens. The space around you becomes calmer because it is no longer crowded with obligations that never belonged to you. And within that calm space, something deeply grounding begins to take root. The quiet understanding that your well-being is not something you must earn through endless sacrifice, but something you are allowed to protect simply because it is yours. Then something surprising begins to surface once you start protecting your peace, a habit so deeply woven into your identity that you might not even notice it at first. The habit of explaining yourself. Not once, not clearly, but over and over again, as if your worth depends on being understood by everyone around you. I remember realizing how much of my energy had been spent crafting explanations, carefully choosing words, replaying conversations in my head just to make sure no one could misinterpret my intentions. It felt responsible. It felt mature. Yet beneath that surface was a quiet fear I had never fully acknowledged. The fear that if I didn't explain myself perfectly, I would be rejected. That realization followed me closely as I continued speaking through this audiobook journey with you. Because the trap of over-explaining is something many thoughtful, self-aware people fall into without noticing. You might recognize the pattern immediately. Someone misunderstands your decision, so you start explaining it in detail. They still seem uncertain, so you explain again. You add context, backstory, emotion, logic, hoping that if you say it clearly enough, long enough, eventually they will see exactly what you mean. But here is the quiet truth that took me years to accept. Some people are not misunderstanding you because you failed to explain clearly. Some people simply see the world through a lens that cannot fully recognize your perspective. At first, that idea can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the belief that communication alone can solve every conflict. We grow up believing that if two people are rational, open-minded, willing to listen, understanding will always follow. Yet life introduces situations where clarity does not change someone's interpretation. In those moments, the instinct to keep explaining becomes a form of emotional chasing. I noticed how exhausting that chase had become. My mind would replay interactions for hours afterward, searching for the exact sentence that might have changed the outcome. If someone still disagreed with me, I felt compelled to defend my reasoning again. If someone questioned my character, my instinct was to present more evidence about who I really was. Yet no amount of explaining ever created the peace I was searching for. Instead, it kept my attention tied to people's opinions, constantly measuring my identity against their reactions. The mind believed it was protecting my reputation, but in reality, it was giving away something far more valuable: my mental clarity. That was the moment I began asking a different question. What if my peace does not depend on everyone understanding me? That question shifts the entire emotional landscape of your life. It does not mean you stop communicating honestly. It does not mean you avoid difficult conversations. What changes is your attachment to the outcome of those conversations. You explain yourself once with sincerity. You speak your truth calmly. After that, you release the need to keep convincing. Letting go of that need feels unfamiliar at first because it challenges the ego's quiet demand to be validated. The ego wants agreement. It wants confirmation that your perspective is correct. When that confirmation does not arrive, it pushes you to keep arguing your case. But emotional maturity begins when you recognize that being understood is not something you can force. Some people will understand you quickly because they share similar values. Others may never fully understand because their experiences, expectations, or beliefs lead them to different conclusions. Neither outcome has the power to define who you are unless you allow it. The moment you stop over-explaining, something subtle begins to change inside you. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer battles for approval. Your thoughts slow down because you are no longer mentally rehearsing speeches to justify every decision. You start noticing how peaceful it feels to let people have their own interpretations without feeling obligated to correct them. That peace grows even deeper when you realize how closely over-explaining is connected to the fear of rejection. Many of us learned early in life that acceptance depended on being agreeable, reasonable, understandable. When someone misunderstood us, it triggered anxiety because it threatened our sense of belonging. Yet as you continue growing into emotional independence, you begin seeing belonging in a new way. Real connection does not require constant defense of your identity. It happens naturally with people who respect your perspective even when they disagree with it. The rest of the world is allowed to form opinions. That understanding frees an enormous amount of mental energy. Instead of chasing approval through endless explanations, you begin investing that energy into self-awareness. You observe your reactions more closely. You notice when your mind tries to defend itself automatically. You practice pausing before responding, choosing clarity instead of emotional urgency. Over time, this practice strengthens something powerful within you: quiet confidence. Quiet confidence does not need long speeches. It does not feel threatened by disagreement. It speaks honestly when necessary, then releases the conversation instead of carrying it for days inside the mind. From that place, letting go becomes less about giving up and more about reclaiming your attention. You let go of the need to control how every story about you is told. You let go of the urge to rewrite conversations that have already ended. You let go of the belief that your value must be constantly explained. Instead, you begin focusing on something far more important: living in alignment with the person you know yourself to be. That alignment brings a calm certainty that words alone can never create. Your actions begin speaking more clearly than explanations ever could. The people who truly see you recognize that authenticity without requiring constant clarification. Meanwhile, the thoughts that once spiraled endlessly through your mind begin losing their urgency. The need to replay every interaction fades because you are no longer trying to manage every perception. You speak honestly. You act with integrity. Then you allow the world to respond however it chooses. Within that space, Your mind becomes quieter than it has been in years. The endless explanations finally fall silent, leaving behind something far more powerful than being understood by everyone. The quiet freedom of simply being yourself without needing to prove it. Just when you finally stop over-explaining yourself, another layer of awareness begins to appear, something many people miss for years because they are too busy trying to keep the peace. I remember the moment I first saw it clearly. It was unsettling, almost like stepping out of a fog that had quietly surrounded my thinking for a long time. The pattern was simple once I noticed it, yet incredibly powerful while it remained hidden. Somehow, in certain conversations, I always ended up feeling like the problem, even when my intentions were honest, even when I was trying to set healthy limits. Somehow the story would shift until I was the one apologizing. The deeper I explored this during this audiobook journey with you, the clearer it became that this experience is not rare. You might recognize it immediately. You bring up a concern calmly, hoping for understanding, yet the conversation quickly flips direction. Suddenly you are being told you are too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult, too demanding. The focus moves away from the original issue, landing directly on your reaction instead. Before long, you find yourself explaining again, defending your feelings, wondering if you overreacted. That quiet confusion is often the first signal that something deeper is happening. Manipulation rarely looks dramatic at first. It does not always arrive with obvious cruelty or loud control. In many situations, it appears through subtle emotional shifts that slowly reshape how you see yourself. The person you are speaking with may avoid accountability by redirecting the conversation toward your behavior instead of their own actions. They may question your memory of events. They may minimize your feelings until you begin questioning whether those feelings were valid in the first place. I remember realizing how often I had accepted those shifts without noticing the cost. My instinct had always been to keep harmony. If someone felt criticized, I immediately tried to soften my words. If someone seemed hurt by what I said, I stepped back quickly, even when the concern I raised was legitimate. At the time, I believed this made me compassionate. What I did not realize was how easily compassion can be turned against you when someone is unwilling to take responsibility for their behavior. When accountability disappears from a conversation, someone must carry the emotional weight of that absence. In many unhealthy dynamics, that responsibility quietly falls onto the most self-aware person in the room. You begin analyzing your tone, your words, your timing, your intentions. Meanwhile, the original behavior that hurt you fades into the background. The narrative shifts until the conversation becomes about your reaction rather than their actions. This pattern can be deeply confusing for people who genuinely want healthy communication, because your instinct is to understand, to improve, to grow. When someone suggests you are the problem, your mind naturally begins searching for ways you might have contributed to the conflict. Self-reflection is healthy, yet manipulation often exploits that strength. The moment you begin questioning your own reality more than the situation itself, your clarity starts fading. You replay the interaction repeatedly in your mind. Maybe I should have said it differently. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I misunderstood. Slowly, the person who caused the discomfort disappears from the center of the story, replaced by your own self-doubt. Recognizing this pattern does not mean assuming bad intentions from everyone. People sometimes react defensively without realizing it. However, when this dynamic repeats again and again, something important is being revealed. A healthy relationship allows space for two truths at the same time. Your feelings matter. Their feelings matter. Accountability flows both directions. Manipulative dynamics, however, often follow a different rule. One person's feelings dominate the conversation, while the other person's experience is constantly questioned or dismissed. Once I started noticing that difference, my understanding of emotional boundaries changed dramatically. Boundaries are not only about protecting your time or energy. They are also about protecting your perception of reality. When someone repeatedly tries to convince you that your feelings are unreasonable or your concerns are invalid, maintaining clarity becomes an act of emotional courage. I remember the first time I resisted the urge to defend myself in one of those conversations. Instead of over-explaining, I simply stated my experience calmly. I did not argue. I did not try to win the discussion. I allowed the other person to react however they chose. What surprised me was how quickly the dynamic revealed itself once I stopped participating in the usual cycle. Without my constant explanations, the attempt to redirect blame became far more visible. That moment taught me something powerful about emotional independence. When you know your intentions are honest, you do not need to convince everyone else of them. You can listen openly without surrendering your sense of truth. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without accepting accusations that do not belong to you. This shift requires mental discipline because your mind may still want to return to old habits. It may urge you to smooth things over quickly, to re-enter the explanation loop, to restore comfort even at the cost of your own clarity. Yet every time you resist that impulse, your awareness becomes stronger. You begin recognizing the difference between healthy disagreement and emotional manipulation. Healthy disagreement invites discussion, reflection, growth. Manipulation avoids responsibility by placing the spotlight entirely on your reaction. The moment you see that pattern clearly, something inside you steadies. You stop absorbing blame that was never yours to carry. You stop chasing validation from people who refuse to acknowledge their role in conflict. Your emotional energy begins returning to you instead of being spent defending yourself in endless conversations. Over time, this clarity reshapes your relationships in subtle ways. The people who value honest dialogue will appreciate your calm boundaries. The people who rely on shifting blame may grow uncomfortable when their usual strategies stop working. That discomfort reveals something important about the dynamic you were once part of. And as that realization settles into your awareness, your mind becomes quieter again. The confusion that once followed those conversations slowly fades, replaced by a deeper confidence in your own perception. You no longer need every person to agree with your perspective in order to trust yourself. Sometimes the most powerful step toward inner peace is simply recognizing when someone tries to make you the problem, then choosing, quietly but firmly, not to carry a story that was never yours to begin with. There comes a moment when something inside you quietly refuses to feel the same pain again. Not in anger, not in revenge, just in clarity. I remember the first time that realization settled deeply enough inside me that it changed my behavior rather than just my thoughts. It was the moment I looked at a familiar pattern of conversation, the same confusion, the same emotional heaviness afterward, the same restless mind replaying every word, and I suddenly understood something simple yet powerful. This does not have to happen again. You know that feeling too. The moment when your mind finally connects the dots between all the previous moments that once felt isolated. The arguments that followed the same script. The explanations that never seemed to change the outcome. The emotional exhaustion that arrived after every interaction with certain people. At some point, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. What once felt like random conflict begins to reveal itself as repetition. That repetition teaches you something important about emotional awareness. People show you who they are not only through what they say, but through what consistently happens when you interact with them. For a long time, I believed patience alone could transform difficult relationships. I believed if I stayed calm enough, kind enough, understanding enough, eventually the dynamic would shift. Yet the truth revealed itself slowly through experience. Patience without boundaries often turns into silent endurance. Endurance may keep a connection alive, yet it quietly erodes your peace. The mind of an overthinker tries to fix these patterns endlessly. You replay conversations hoping to discover the exact moment where things went wrong. You imagine different responses that might have changed the outcome. You tell yourself that next time you will explain it more clearly, react more carefully, communicate more effectively. But the more awareness grows within you, the more you begin recognizing a different truth. Not every dynamic is meant to be repaired. Some patterns exist because the other person benefits from them remaining exactly as they are. When accountability never arrives, when respect never stabilizes, when the same emotional confusion returns again and again, something deeper is being revealed about the relationship itself. I remember the moment I realized that walking away is not always an act of defeat. Sometimes it is the first act of self-respect. For many sensitive, empathetic people, leaving a relationship feels like failure. The mind immediately begins questioning whether you tried hard enough, whether you misunderstood something, whether you should give one more chance. That hesitation is natural because caring deeply makes it difficult to accept that someone cannot meet you where you stand. Yet emotional maturity eventually introduces a different question. How many times must a situation repeat before you accept what it is showing you? That question does not arrive with bitterness. It arrives with calm awareness. You begin noticing how your body reacts around certain people, the tension in your chest, the careful monitoring of your words, the quiet anticipation that something uncomfortable might happen again. Your nervous system often recognizes unhealthy dynamics long before your mind accepts them. Listening to that signal requires courage because walking away disrupts the familiar. Even painful familiarity can feel safer than the uncertainty of change. The mind prefers known discomfort over unknown possibility. Yet something powerful happens the moment you decide that your peace matters more than repeating a harmful cycle. You stop negotiating with behaviors that consistently drain your emotional energy. You stop convincing yourself that small improvements erase larger patterns. You begin measuring relationships not by occasional good moments, but by the overall effect they have on your well-being. That clarity does not make you cold. It makes you honest. Honesty allows you to see when effort exists only on one side of the connection. It allows you to recognize when apologies are followed by the same behavior again. It allows you to acknowledge that growth requires willingness from both people, not endless patience from one. Walking away from those dynamics does not erase the memories you shared with someone. It does not mean the connection was entirely meaningless. What it does is protect your future from repeating the same emotional lesson indefinitely. At first, the space left behind may feel unfamiliar. Your mind may still wander back to the relationship, replaying moments that once felt important. This is where emotional discipline becomes essential again. You remind yourself why the decision was necessary. You remember the pattern rather than the isolated moments that looked better. Slowly, the emotional attachment begins loosening its grip. Something unexpected begins filling the space that once held constant tension. Peace, not dramatic excitement, not loud happiness, but a quiet steadiness that grows stronger each day. Your thoughts become less crowded because you are no longer trying to understand behavior that never made sense. Your emotional energy returns to you instead of being scattered across unresolved conflict. From that place of calm awareness, you begin noticing something profound about your identity. You are no longer the person who tolerates everything in the name of understanding. You are someone who values compassion yet refuses to sacrifice self-respect. This transformation reshapes how you move through future relationships as well. You begin recognizing unhealthy patterns earlier. You speak your boundaries more clearly. You observe whether actions align with words before investing your emotional energy deeply. The most powerful realization arrives quietly one day when you look back at the situation you once struggled to leave. You notice how different your mind feels now. The heaviness that once followed those interactions has disappeared. The endless mental debates have grown silent. The emotional storm that once felt unavoidable has faded into distance. That is the moment you understand something with absolute certainty. Some people will never have the power to make you feel that way again, not because they changed, but because you finally did. You thought the hardest part would be leaving. It wasn't. The real challenge begins in the quiet that follows. I remember expecting relief the moment I stepped away from the patterns that once drained me, believing freedom would arrive like sunlight breaking through clouds. Instead, something more complicated appeared, a strange mixture of peace and sadness, a silence where familiar voices once existed. That was the moment I realized growth carries its own kind of grief. You may know that feeling already. The moment you create distance from relationships that once shaped your daily emotional world. Even if those connections were exhausting, even if they constantly triggered your anxiety or self-doubt, they still held memories. They still carried moments of laughter, vulnerability, shared experiences that once felt meaningful. When you walk away from people who cannot grow with you, you are not only leaving behind the pain, you are also saying goodbye to the version of life you once imagined with them. That realization lands heavily in the heart. I remember sitting with that truth quietly, noticing how the mind tries to simplify emotional experiences into clear categories. Good people stay, harmful people leave. Yet real life rarely follows such clean lines. Some relationships contain both warmth and damage. Some people mean, while yet remain trapped inside patterns that hurt everyone around them. Letting go of those connections does not erase the care you once felt. That is where the grief of growth begins. You are not grieving the toxicity itself. You are grieving the potential that never became reality. The conversations that never evolved into understanding. The trust that could have deepened if both people were willing to grow. The mind revisits those possibilities again and again, imagining what might have been different if circumstances had changed. Yet awareness gently reminds you that possibility alone cannot sustain a relationship. As this realization settles deeper, another emotional layer appears. You begin recognizing that the person you once were inside those dynamics no longer exists in the same way. Growth quietly reshapes identity. The version of you who tolerated certain patterns out of fear, loyalty, or hope begins dissolving. That transformation carries both pride and loss. I remember noticing how certain memories began feeling distant, almost like scenes from a life I once lived, but no longer fully recognized. Conversations that once consumed my thoughts suddenly appeared clearer when viewed through the lens of self-awareness. The anxiety I once carried after interactions slowly faded because the environment that created that tension no longer surrounded me. Still, the human heart does not detach instantly. You may find yourself missing people who were not healthy for you. That does not mean your decision was wrong. It simply means you are human. Emotional attachment forms through shared time, vulnerability, repeated interaction. When those bonds dissolve, the nervous system must slowly adjust to the new emotional landscape. This adjustment period often surprises people who expect healing to feel immediately empowering. Instead, healing sometimes feels quiet, reflective, almost fragile. You may experience moments where you question whether distance was necessary. You may feel tempted to return simply because the absence feels unfamiliar. Yet each time that urge appears, your awareness invites you to remember something deeper than nostalgia. Growth requires space. Without distance from the patterns that once shaped your reactions, the mind struggles to develop new emotional habits. Space allows your nervous system to settle. Space allows your thoughts to become clearer. Space allows you to rediscover parts of yourself that were overshadowed by constant emotional negotiation. I remember the first time I noticed how peaceful an ordinary day could feel without the underlying tension of certain relationships. There was no need to monitor someone's mood. No pressure to explain my feelings repeatedly. No fear that honesty would trigger conflict. Just quiet emotional stability. That stability becomes the foundation for something important, self-trust. When you spend years adjusting yourself to maintain difficult relationships, you slowly disconnect from your own internal guidance. Your instincts become quieter because you are constantly overriding them in order to preserve harmony. Walking away begins the process of reconnecting with that inner compass. At first it whispers gently. You notice when a conversation feels respectful. You recognize when someone listens without turning your feelings into an argument. You begin appreciating the calm presence of people who communicate with honesty rather than manipulation. Through those experiences, your definition of connection evolves. Relationships stop feeling like emotional puzzles that require endless analysis. They begin feeling supportive, balanced, grounded in mutual respect. That shift reveals something profound about your own transformation. You did not walk away simply to escape pain. You walked away to create space for healthier emotional experiences to enter your life. Still, even with that awareness, moments of sadness may return from time to time. A memory may surface unexpectedly. A familiar place may remind you of someone who once shared that chapter of your life. In those moments, the heart acknowledges the past without needing to return to it. You allow yourself to feel the emotion fully, because true growth does not erase what came before. It honors the lessons carried through those experiences while choosing a different path forward. The relationships that once shaped your story remain part of your journey, yet they no longer define your future. As time passes, the grief softens into understanding. You begin realizing that some people were meant to walk beside you only until a certain point in your evolution. Their presence helped reveal what you needed to learn about boundaries, self-worth, emotional independence. When that lesson becomes clear, the path naturally continues without them. In that quiet acceptance, something gentle unfolds inside your mind. The sadness slowly transforms into gratitude for the awareness you gained. The emptiness left behind begins filling with new clarity about the life you are building now. A life where growth is no longer something you fear losing people over, but something you embrace because it leads you closer to the peace you were always searching for. Something begins to shift after the grief softens. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like the first light of morning slipping through a window you forgot was there. I remember noticing it one day in a simple moment when I realized my thoughts were calmer than they used to be, my reactions slower, my mind less desperate to prove something to someone. That was the moment I understood something powerful was happening beneath the surface. A version of me I had never fully allowed to exist was finally beginning to appear. You may be experiencing that same quiet transformation right now without even realizing it. When you stop spending your emotional energy managing other people's expectations, something remarkable happens inside your mind. The constant pressure to perform, explain, justify, or adapt begins fading. The mental noise that once filled every corner of your thoughts slowly dissolves. In that silence, you begin meeting someone important, yourself. For a long time, many of us build our identity around reactions. We become the person who keeps the peace, the person who absorbs tension, the person who adapts quickly so conflict disappears. These roles may begin with good intentions, yet over time, they slowly disconnect us from something deeper. Authenticity. I remember asking myself a simple question that felt strangely difficult to answer. If I stopped trying to manage how everyone else felt about me, who would I actually be? The mind hesitates when faced with that question because authenticity requires honesty. It asks you to examine the difference between who you truly are and who you learn to become in order to survive certain environments. As emotional awareness grows, that difference becomes clearer. You begin noticing the small ways you used to shrink yourself, the opinions you avoided expressing, the boundaries you softened to keep others comfortable, the decisions you delayed because you were waiting for approval that never really came. That awareness is not meant to create regret. It creates freedom. Because once you see those patterns clearly, you gain the power to choose differently. Authenticity is not about becoming someone new. It is about removing the layers of fear, validation seeking, and emotional conditioning that once covered your natural identity. At first, that process can feel unfamiliar. When you begin speaking honestly about what you need, some people may respond with surprise. They were accustomed to the version of you who quietly adapted. When you start protecting your emotional space, certain dynamics naturally change. Some relationships deepen because they were built on genuine respect. Others fade because they depended on your silence. That shift is not something to fear. It is evidence that your life is aligning more closely with truth. I remember the first time I expressed a boundary calmly without apologizing for it. There was no anger in my voice, no attempt to control the outcome, just a clear statement of what I was no longer willing to accept. The moment felt simple, yet inside it carried a profound transformation. Because authenticity does not shout. It stands quietly in certainty. As you continue growing into this version of yourself, you may notice something else beginning to change. The need for constant validation slowly loses its grip. The old habit of measuring your worth through other people's reactions becomes less convincing. You begin trusting your internal compass more than external approval. That trust strengthens your emotional resilience in ways that are difficult to describe until you experience it. Situations that once triggered anxiety begin feeling manageable. Criticism that once lingered in your thoughts loses its intensity. Even rejection starts appearing in a new light. Instead of interpreting it as proof of your inadequacy, you begin seeing it as information, a sign that certain paths, environments, or relationships simply do not align with who you are becoming. This shift transforms the way your mind processes life. You stop trying to control every outcome. You stop analyzing every conversation, searching for hidden meanings. Your attention returns to the present moment rather than wandering endlessly through imagined scenarios. That presence brings something invaluable: clarity. When the mind is no longer trapped in constant overthinking, your natural intuition becomes easier to hear. Decisions feel less complicated. Emotional reactions become more balanced. You begin responding to situations rather than reacting from old patterns of fear or insecurity. Through this process, a deeper sense of self-worth begins forming within you. Not the fragile kind that depends on praise or recognition, but the quiet confidence that grows from self-respect. I noticed it in small moments first. The way I no longer felt obligated to justify every decision. The way I could sit comfortably with my own thoughts without needing distraction. The way I could accept both my strengths and imperfections without feeling defined by either. Authenticity allows space for that kind of acceptance. You no longer feel pressure to be perfect. Growth becomes a continuous process rather than a destination you must reach quickly. Each experience becomes part of your evolution instead of a test you must pass. As this mindset deepens, something beautiful begins unfolding in your daily life. Relationships become more genuine because you are no longer presenting a filtered version of yourself. Conversations become more meaningful because they are built on honesty rather than careful emotional navigation. Most importantly, your relationship with yourself changes completely. You become someone you trust, someone who listens to their own intuition, someone who protects their peace without guilt, someone who understands that authenticity is not selfish but necessary for a healthy, balanced life. Over time, you begin recognizing that the struggles you once faced were not meaningless obstacles. They were the experiences that revealed where your boundaries needed strengthening, where your identity needed rediscovering, where your inner voice needed reclaiming. Without those lessons, this transformation would never have unfolded. So as you continue moving forward, you carry something quietly powerful within you. Not perfection, not absolute certainty, just a steady awareness of who you are becoming. A person no longer defined by fear of rejection, no longer controlled by the opinions of others, no longer trapped in endless mental loops searching for approval. Just someone standing calmly in their own truth, allowing their authentic self to exist fully, naturally, without needing permission from anyone else. Something strange happens after you begin living more authentically. At first, you expect clarity to feel like constant confidence, like a solid ground that never shifts beneath your feet. But that is not always what growth looks like. I remember a period where everything I used to recognize about myself began fading quietly. The roles I once played no longer fit. The habits that once defined my days felt foreign. Even the emotional reactions that once seemed automatic started disappearing. For a moment it felt unsettling, almost like standing in a room after the furniture has been removed. You may recognize that feeling too. It arrives when your old identity begins dissolving faster than your new one forms. The mind wants stability, something familiar to hold on to. Yet growth often removes the familiar before the new shape of your life fully appears. That in-between space can feel empty, even lonely, because the version of you that once navigated the world is no longer present in the same way. This is the quiet death of identity. Not a dramatic collapse, not a sudden transformation that everyone around you immediately notices. Instead, it unfolds internally, slowly dismantling beliefs that once shaped your decisions. I remember realizing that many of my thoughts had been reactions to past experiences rather than reflections of who I truly was. The need to be liked, the instinct to over-explain, the habit of absorbing responsibility for emotions that were never mine to carry. When those patterns began falling away, something unexpected happened. Silence. Without those mental loops constantly running, my mind felt strangely spacious. Yet that space initially felt uncomfortable because I had spent years filling every corner of my thoughts with analysis, anticipation, emotional preparation for situations that might happen. The absence of that constant noise made me question who I was without it. You might ask yourself a similar question at this stage of your journey. If you are no longer the person who overthinks every interaction, who tries endlessly to fix broken dynamics, who measures your worth through other people's reactions, then who are you? That question is not meant to frighten you. It is an invitation. The empty space left behind by old patterns is not a void to fear. It is the environment where your authentic identity begins rebuilding itself. Yet rebirth rarely happens instantly. Just as a forest regenerates slowly after a fire clears the land, your inner landscape requires time to form new emotional structures. During this period, your mind may drift through moments of uncertainty. You may feel less attached to conversations that once excited you. Certain environments may suddenly feel draining even if they once felt normal. Some friendships may feel distant because the emotional version of you they once knew no longer exists in the same form. This shift is not arrogance. It is evolution. I remember noticing how different my reactions became during situations that once triggered anxiety. Someone's criticism no longer lingered in my thoughts for hours. A misunderstanding no longer forced me into endless explanations. Instead, there was a calm pause where my mind simply observed the moment before responding. That pause is where rebirth begins. Because in that space you gain the freedom to choose your reactions instead of repeating old emotional scripts. Your identity becomes less about protecting yourself from imagined threats, more about living from a place of awareness. The ego often resists this process at first. The ego prefers familiar roles because they offer predictable responses. It tells you who you are supposed to be in order to maintain acceptance within certain environments. When those roles dissolve, the ego searches desperately for something to replace them. Yet authentic identity cannot be built through desperation. It forms through patience. You begin noticing small changes in how you relate to yourself. Instead of judging your emotions harshly, you observe them with curiosity. Instead of forcing yourself into situations that drain your energy, you allow yourself to step back without guilt. Instead of chasing validation, you begin valuing the quiet satisfaction of living in alignment with your values. Over time, these small shifts create a deeper transformation. Your sense of self stops, depending on external reactions. Praise becomes pleasant, but not necessary. Criticism becomes informative rather than defining. Even solitude begins feeling less like isolation, more like a space where your thoughts can settle naturally. This new identity is not rigid. It is fluid, aware, adaptable. I noticed that the more I accepted this evolving version of myself, the less I felt pressured to prove anything to anyone. Conversations became lighter because I no longer carried the weight of defending my worth. Relationships became clearer because I could recognize which connections supported growth rather than resisted it. That clarity is part of the rebirth. You are no longer rebuilding your identity from fear or approval. You are shaping it through self-respect, emotional awareness, personal responsibility. The version of you emerging now is not defined by past wounds, but by the lessons those experiences revealed. Still, there will be moments when the emptiness returns briefly. Moments where you wonder if the old version of you would have handled something differently. That reflection is natural because identity does not transform in a straight line. Yet every time you pause, breathe, observe your thoughts rather than becoming trapped inside them, you reinforce the new foundation forming beneath your life. Gradually, the empty space begins filling with something steady. Not noise, not confusion, just quiet clarity. You realize that the person you are becoming does not need constant reassurance to exist. You are no longer searching desperately for meaning, because meaning now grows naturally from the way you live each day. The old identity had to dissolve so this one could appear. What once felt like emptiness was actually the beginning of something deeper, a calm inner presence that no longer depends on who you used to be, because the person you are becoming finally feels real. There comes a moment when the noise inside your mind grows quiet enough for a simple truth to rise above everything else. I remember that moment clearly. After all the questioning, the self-doubt, the endless emotional loops that once filled my thoughts, something steady finally appeared beneath it all. It wasn't loud motivation or dramatic confidence. It was something calmer, deeper, a quiet realization that whispered one powerful sentence. You can do it. You might think those words sound simple, maybe even ordinary. Yet when they come from a place of real awareness, they carry an entirely different weight. Because by the time you reach this point in your journey, you are no longer the same person who started searching for answers. You have walked through confusion. You have faced the patterns that once controlled your reactions. You have recognized the toxic dynamics that drained your energy. You have sat with the uncomfortable truth of your own habits, your own fears, your own moments of self-sabotage. Each one of those experiences reshaped you in ways that are not always visible on the surface. I remember looking back at the version of myself who once believed every thought deserved attention. The person who replayed conversations endlessly, searching for hidden meanings. The person who carried emotional responsibility for situations that were never mine to fix. At the time, those habits felt like awareness, like compassion, like emotional intelligence. But now I see something different. True emotional intelligence is not the ability to analyze everything. It is the ability to know when analysis no longer serves you. It is the strength to recognize which thoughts deserve your energy and which ones simply pass through your mind like clouds drifting across the sky. That awareness changes everything. Because once you realize that not every thought is truth, you gain the power to step outside the mental prison that once trapped you. The mind may still produce doubts, worries, predictions about the future, yet you no longer follow every one of those thoughts into endless emotional spirals. You observe them. You breathe. You choose your response. This is where real freedom begins. For a long time, you may have believed that inner peace required perfect circumstances, the right relationships, the right environment, the right validation from others. Yet as your awareness deepens, you begin understanding something far more powerful. Peace is not created by controlling the world around you. Peace is created by mastering your reaction to it. I remember the first time I truly felt that shift. A situation unfolded that once would have triggered hours of overthinking. Words were said. Opinions were expressed. In the past, I would have replayed every detail, questioning what I should have said differently. But this time something inside me remained steady. I listened. I accepted the moment for what it was. I allowed the experience to exist without forcing it into endless interpretation. When the conversation ended, my mind moved forward naturally instead of staying trapped in the past. That was the moment I understood the power you are building inside yourself. You are not learning how to avoid difficulty. You are learning how to move through life without losing your emotional center. Anxiety may still appear from time to time. Uncertainty may still visit your thoughts. Yet those feelings no longer define you. Because now you know something that once felt impossible to believe. You are stronger than the stories your mind once told you. That strength does not mean you will never struggle again. Growth is not a straight line that removes every challenge from your path. Life will continue presenting situations that test your patience, your boundaries, your perspective. The difference now is how you meet those moments. Instead of reacting from fear, you respond with awareness. Instead of shrinking to protect other people's comfort, you stand in quiet self-respect. Instead of chasing validation, you measure your worth through the alignment between your actions and your values. That alignment becomes your foundation. I see it in you already. The fact that you have followed this journey of reflection means something inside you is always searching for deeper understanding. You were never truly lost. You were simply learning how to navigate the complexity of your own mind. Now that understanding is beginning to settle into something steady, you trust yourself a little more. You recognize when your thoughts are trying to pull you back into old patterns. You notice when your emotional energy is being drained by situations that no longer deserve your attention. Each time you choose clarity over chaos, you strengthen the new identity you have been building. You are becoming someone who respects their own peace. Someone who understands that letting go is not weakness, but wisdom. Someone who knows that emotional independence is not isolation, but freedom. I remember thinking that transformation required dramatic breakthroughs. Something powerful enough to instantly change everything about how I thought and felt. But the truth is much simpler. Transformation happens through small decisions repeated consistently. The decision to pause before reacting. The decision to question a negative thought instead of believing it immediately. The decision to protect your boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable. Those moments may seem small, yet together they reshape your entire life. So when you hear the words "you can do it," understand what they truly mean now. They are not empty encouragement. They are recognition of the strength you have already developed. You have faced your mind. You have challenged the patterns that once controlled you. You have allowed old identities to fall away so something more authentic could take their place. That journey alone proves something important. You are capable of more clarity, more resilience, more inner peace than you once believed. Life will continue moving forward, bringing new experiences, new relationships, new challenges that test your perspective. Yet the person walking into those moments now carries something powerful within them. A calm mind, a grounded identity, a quiet confidence that does not need constant reassurance. And when your thoughts grow noisy again, when the world feels overwhelming for a moment, you can return to that simple truth that now lives inside your awareness. You can pause, breathe, look at your life with clear eyes, and remember that everything you have learned along this journey has already prepared you for whatever comes next. Because you really can do it. Just when you begin believing you have finally stepped beyond the chaos of your old thought patterns, something subtle tries to pull you back. It does not arrive loudly. It does not look like fear at first glance. Instead, it disguises itself as logic, caution, humility, even responsibility. I remember noticing it during a quiet moment when I thought I had already grown past the version of myself who doubted everything. Yet there it was again, whispering familiar questions in the background of my mind. Are you sure you are ready? What if you fail? What if people see the real you and decide you are not enough? That quiet voice is something many people misunderstand. It feels personal, almost protective, as if it is trying to keep you safe. But what you are often hearing is something deeper and more complicated. It is the ego's silent trickery, the subtle way your mind protects the identity it has grown comfortable with, even when that identity is built around limitation. You might imagine the ego as arrogance or pride, yet its most powerful form is much quieter than that. The ego often hides inside insecurity, inside overthinking, inside the constant need to measure yourself against the expectations of others. It tells you stories about who you are supposed to be, what risks are too dangerous, which dreams are unrealistic. I remember realizing that many of the thoughts I once believed were realistic were actually small mental cages built from past experiences. A moment of rejection becomes evidence that you should avoid being vulnerable again. A past mistake becomes proof that you should not try something new. The ego collects these memories carefully, stacking them together like invisible walls that shape the boundaries of your identity. For a long time, those walls feel like protection. They convince you that staying quiet keeps you safe. They tell you that lowering your expectations prevents disappointment. They encourage you to analyze every possible outcome until action itself becomes exhausting. But what the ego never admits is that safety built on limitation slowly shrinks your life. I noticed this pattern clearly when I began stepping outside my usual habits. Each time I attempted something unfamiliar, the mind responded immediately with reasons to hesitate. It reminded me of past failures. It predicted awkward conversations. It warned me about criticism that had not even happened yet. At first, those thoughts felt convincing because they were delivered with such calm certainty. Yet something changed the moment I began observing those thoughts rather than obeying them automatically. You might recognize this moment too. The moment when awareness interrupts the automatic loop of self-doubt. Instead of accepting the thought as truth, you pause long enough to ask a different question. Is this thought helping me grow, or is it protecting the comfort of my old identity? That question reveals something powerful about the ego. Its primary goal is not happiness or fulfillment. Its goal is familiarity. The ego prefers a known struggle over an unfamiliar possibility. It would rather keep you repeating old emotional patterns than risk the uncertainty that comes with personal expansion. Once you see this pattern clearly, something inside your mind begins shifting. The thoughts do not disappear completely. The voice of doubt may still appear from time to time, but now you recognize it for what it is, a reflection of the identity you are slowly outgrowing. I remember noticing how this awareness changed the way I responded to those thoughts. Instead of fighting them aggressively or trying to silence them, I simply acknowledged their presence. I understood that they were echoes of a past mindset rather than instructions for my future. That simple shift weakened their influence dramatically. Because when you stop believing every thought that enters your mind, you regain control over your direction. The ego may suggest staying small, avoiding risk, protecting yourself from imagined judgment. But awareness reminds you that growth rarely happens within the boundaries of comfort. This realization brings an interesting kind of freedom. You no longer feel obligated to prove your worth to the voice of doubt inside your mind. You simply recognize that it exists because it once served a purpose. At some point in your life, those protective thoughts helped you navigate difficult experiences. Yet the version of you who needed that protection is no longer the same person listening to these words now. You have gained self-awareness. You have recognized emotional patterns that once controlled your reactions. You have practiced detaching from thoughts that do not align with your growth. That evolution changes how you relate to your own mind. Instead of seeing your thoughts as commands, you begin treating them as suggestions. Some deserve attention. Others simply pass through your awareness like background noise that does not require response. This shift quietly transforms the way you experience life. Situations that once triggered intense self-doubt become opportunities for curiosity. Challenges that once felt threatening begin appearing as invitations to expand your understanding of yourself. The ego may still whisper from time to time, reminding you of who you used to believe you were. Yet its voice grows softer with every decision you make from awareness rather than fear. I remember realizing that the ego's trickery loses power the moment you stop arguing with it. When you no longer feel the need to prove your worth to your own doubts, they begin fading naturally into the background. In their place, something calmer begins emerging, a quiet trust in your ability to handle life as it unfolds. Not because you have eliminated uncertainty or fear completely, but because you understand that your identity is no longer limited by the stories your mind once repeated. You are no longer the person who stays small to avoid judgment. You are someone who notices those thoughts, smiles at their familiarity, then continues walking forward anyway, allowing the version of you that once felt impossible to grow stronger with every step you take. Just when you think you've finally moved past the pain, forgiveness appears as the next quiet challenge waiting in front of you. Not the version of forgiveness most people talk about, not the polite words people expect you to say, not the forced peace that hides unresolved hurt beneath a calm expression. I remember the moment I realized something important about forgiveness that no one had explained clearly before. It wasn't about pretending nothing happened. It wasn't about excusing someone's behavior. It wasn't about welcoming someone back into your life simply because time had passed. What they didn't tell you about forgiveness is that it has far more to do with your freedom than with their redemption. You may have been taught that forgiving someone means letting them off the hook, as if releasing your anger somehow erases the consequences of what they did. That idea often creates resistance inside the mind, especially when the hurt was real, when the betrayal cut deeper than you expected, when someone you trusted showed a side of themselves you never imagined. I remember carrying that resistance for a long time. The thought of forgiveness felt unfair, almost like surrendering the justice my mind believed was deserved. My thoughts would replay the moments again, searching for validation that the pain I felt was justified. You might recognize that loop too. The mind returns to the memory again and again, revisiting the conversation, the decision, the betrayal that changed how you saw someone. Each replay strengthens the emotional charge attached to the experience. Each reflection quietly reinforces the identity of the wounded version of yourself. At some point, however, a different question begins to appear. How long do you want that moment to continue living inside your mind? That question changes the entire perspective of forgiveness. Because when you hold on to resentment, your mind remains connected to the past in a way that keeps the emotional wound active. The person who hurt you may have moved forward with their life, unaware of the mental energy you continue investing in the memory. Forgiveness does not erase the event, yet it changes the role that memory plays in your life. I realized this slowly, through moments of quiet reflection rather than sudden understanding. I noticed how certain memories still had the power to shift my mood instantly. A single thought could pull me back into emotions that belonged to a version of myself who existed years ago. That was the moment I understood something powerful. Holding on to anger does not punish the person who caused the pain. It quietly punishes the person carrying it. This realization does not mean the other person was right. It does not mean the experience was acceptable or deserved. Forgiveness is not an agreement with the past. It is a decision about your future. You begin asking yourself whether continuing to carry that emotional weight is helping you grow or keeping you tied to a chapter of your life that has already ended. I remember sitting with that question longer than I expected, because letting go of resentment can feel like losing something important. Anger sometimes creates the illusion of strength, as if maintaining that emotion proves you will never allow yourself to be hurt again. But emotional resilience grows from a different place entirely. True strength appears when you no longer need resentment to protect your boundaries. When you recognize that the lessons learned from pain can remain without allowing the bitterness to stay with them. Forgiveness does not invite someone back into your life automatically. It does not erase the clarity you gained about their behavior. In many cases, forgiveness exists quietly while distance remains firmly in place. You may never speak to that person again. You may never receive an apology that satisfies your sense of closure. Yet forgiveness still becomes possible because it no longer depends on their actions. It becomes something you offer yourself. I began noticing how different my thoughts felt once I stopped replaying certain memories with the same intensity. The events still existed in my story, yet they no longer controlled the emotional tone of my present moment. Instead of anger, there was understanding. Instead of resentment, there was perspective. People sometimes hurt others because they are trapped inside their own unresolved pain, their own fears, their own limited awareness. Recognizing this does not excuse harmful behavior, yet it removes the illusion that their actions define your worth. That shift changes how you view the entire experience. You are no longer the victim of someone else's choices. You are the person who learned from the experience, who strengthened boundaries, who developed deeper emotional awareness because of what happened. Forgiveness transforms the narrative from one of damage into one of growth. It allows you to release the emotional chains connecting you to that moment. It creates space inside your mind where peace can finally settle. At first, that peace may feel unfamiliar. Your thoughts may instinctively return to the old story, attempting to revive the emotional intensity that once surrounded it. Yet each time you gently redirect your focus toward the present, the grip of that memory weakens. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The story becomes just that, a story. A chapter in your life that shaped your understanding without defining your identity. In that quiet realization, forgiveness reveals its true purpose. Not as a gift you offer someone who hurt you, but as a doorway you open for yourself, allowing your mind to step out of the past and finally rest in the calm clarity of the present moment. Just when you think the goal of this entire journey was happiness, a deeper realization quietly arrives. I remember believing for a long time that happiness was the finish line, that if I could just fix my thoughts, heal the wounds from the past, remove toxic relationships, control my anxiety, then one day I would wake up feeling permanently happy. That belief drove many of my decisions. It shaped the way I evaluated my progress. Every difficult day felt like failure. Every moment of sadness felt like I had somehow lost the progress I thought I had made. Then something surprising happened. I began noticing that the people who seemed the most grounded, the most emotionally strong, were not always happy. They still faced stress, disappointment, uncertainty. Yet there was something different about the way they carried those emotions. Their minds were not constantly fighting reality. They were not trapped in endless mental resistance. That was the moment I realized happiness was never the real destination. Inner peace was. You may have spent years chasing happiness the same way I once did, waiting for the right circumstances to arrive. The right relationship, the right recognition, the right level of success, the right emotional environment where nothing uncomfortable disturbs your mind. But life rarely follows that script. Challenges appear even during your best moments. Unexpected change interrupts carefully built plans. When happiness becomes the only acceptable emotional state, every difficult experience begins to feel like something has gone wrong. Inner peace changes that entire perspective. Peace does not mean the absence of challenges. Peace means your mind no longer fights every moment that does not match your expectations. It means you can experience sadness without believing your life is falling apart. You can face uncertainty without your thoughts spiraling into catastrophic predictions. I remember noticing how this shift quietly transformed the way I lived my days. A difficult conversation no longer followed me for hours afterward. A mistake no longer turned into a long internal lecture about my worth. Instead, there was space inside my thoughts. Space to observe, space to breathe, space to allow life to unfold without trying to control every detail. You might notice that same space beginning to appear within you now. When your mind stops trying to force happiness into every moment, it becomes easier to accept the full range of human experience. Frustration, disappointment, joy, calm, uncertainty. All of it becomes part of a natural rhythm rather than something your mind must constantly correct. This acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you resilient. Resilience grows when you stop expecting life to feel perfect and start trusting your ability to navigate whatever appears. I remember realizing that my emotional strength had nothing to do with avoiding negative experiences. It had everything to do with how quickly I returned to balance after them. Balance becomes easier when you understand that your thoughts are not always accurate reflections of reality. Your mind may still produce moments of anxiety. It may revisit old fears occasionally. Yet you are no longer the person who follows those thoughts blindly. Awareness now sits quietly between the thought and your reaction. That awareness is the foundation of peace. Instead of immediately believing the worst interpretation of a situation, you pause. Instead of assuming someone's opinion defines your value, you reflect. Instead of reacting emotionally to every external stimulus, you respond from a place of understanding. I noticed how much lighter my days felt when I stopped demanding constant happiness from life. The small moments began carrying more meaning. A quiet walk, a calm conversation, even a simple breath taken without rushing toward the next task. Peace lives inside those ordinary moments. You do not have to earn it through perfection. You simply allow it by removing the mental resistance that once filled your mind with unnecessary noise. Sometimes people worry that choosing peace means losing ambition or excitement for life. I discovered the opposite is true. When your mind is not overwhelmed by emotional chaos, your energy becomes clearer. Your decisions become more intentional. You pursue goals not because you are trying to prove your worth, but because you genuinely care about the direction of your life. That difference changes everything. Your motivation becomes healthier. Your relationships become more authentic. Your sense of identity becomes less dependent on external approval. I remember the quiet realization that arrived one evening while reflecting on everything this journey had revealed. Happiness comes and goes. It rises during beautiful moments, fades during difficult ones, returns again in unexpected ways. Peace remains steady beneath all of it. You carry it through success without becoming arrogant. You carry it through failure without collapsing into self-doubt. It becomes the emotional center that allows you to experience life fully without being controlled by every temporary feeling. You may still laugh loudly when joy appears. You may still feel sadness when something meaningful ends. But your mind no longer treats those emotions as permanent states that define who you are. You simply experience them. Then you return to the calm awareness that now lives quietly inside you. And as you continue walking forward through your life, you may realize something profound. The peace you once believed existed somewhere outside of you was quietly growing within you the entire time. There comes a quiet moment after everything you have been through, a moment where the noise finally begins to soften, where the constant pressure to figure everything out slowly loosens its grip on your mind, where you start realizing that life was never meant to be perfectly understood before it could be peacefully lived. I remember reaching that moment myself, not through some dramatic breakthrough, but through the slow exhaustion of carrying too many thoughts for too long. The mind eventually grows tired of fighting every uncertainty. That is when something unexpected begins to appear, a faint light in places that once looked completely dark. You might recognize that moment now, or perhaps you are approaching it without even realizing it. For so long your mind searched for clarity by trying to control everything. You analyzed conversations, replayed mistakes, questioned your worth, wondered if people truly valued you, worried about the future, tried to make sense of every emotion that appeared inside you. The effort was exhausting, yet it came from a place of survival. Your mind believed that if it could think enough, worry enough, analyze enough, it could protect you from pain. But somewhere along the journey, you begin to see the truth. Peace never comes from controlling every outcome. Peace appears when you stop believing you must. I remember the moment this understanding quietly shifted something inside me. Life did not suddenly become easier. Challenges still appeared. People still misunderstood me. Unexpected changes still interrupted carefully built plans. Yet the way I carried those experiences began to change. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" a different question started emerging. What is this moment trying to teach me? That shift may seem small, yet it transforms the entire landscape of your inner world. Because the moment you move from resistance to curiosity, your mind stops treating life as an enemy. The same experiences that once created frustration begin to reveal lessons about patience, resilience, boundaries, self-respect. You start noticing how much strength you have developed simply by surviving moments you once believed would break you. Think about that for a moment. There were nights when your thoughts refused to quiet down. Times when anxiety convinced you that the future would collapse under uncertainty. Moments when someone's words cut deeper than you expected. Moments when you questioned your identity, your worth, your direction. Yet you were still here, still learning, still evolving, still moving forward. That realization becomes one of the most powerful lights you will ever discover, because it proves something important about your nature. You are far more resilient than the fearful voice inside your mind once suggested. I began noticing that resilience growing in quiet ways. My reactions slowed down. Situations that once triggered intense emotional responses now felt easier to observe. I was no longer chasing validation from every person I encountered. The need to prove myself slowly dissolved. You may feel that shift inside yourself too. It happens when you understand that your value does not rise or fall based on someone else's approval. When you stop measuring your identity through comparison. When you realize that the person you are becoming matters far more than the opinions of those who cannot see your journey clearly. With that realization comes a different kind of freedom. Freedom to walk away from relationships that drain your energy. Freedom to set boundaries without guilt. Freedom to forgive without allowing someone to hurt you again. Freedom to experience emotions without believing they control you. Life becomes less about avoiding pain and more about navigating it with awareness. That awareness is the light. Not a sudden flash that removes every shadow, but a steady glow that grows stronger as you continue developing self-understanding. You begin seeing patterns in your thoughts. You notice how the ego tries to protect itself by creating fear or defensiveness. You learn how to pause before reacting emotionally. Each moment of awareness strengthens your relationship with yourself. I remember the quiet comfort that arrived when I stopped trying to become a completely different person and instead focused on understanding the person I already was. Growth did not mean rejecting my past. It meant learning from it. Every mistake became a lesson. Every painful experience became a teacher guiding me toward greater emotional intelligence. You might look back at your own experiences now and notice something similar. The heartbreak that once shattered your expectations taught you how to recognize unhealthy dynamics. The loneliness that once felt unbearable helped you develop independence. The anxiety that once overwhelmed your mind pushed you toward deeper self-awareness. None of those experiences were easy, yet each one carried a hidden light, and that light begins to guide you forward. Not toward a life free of challenges, but toward a life where challenges no longer destroy your sense of self. You move through situations with greater emotional discipline. Your thoughts become clearer. Your reactions become calmer. The world around you may remain unpredictable, but the world within you becomes stable. You begin trusting your ability to navigate whatever appears next. I often think about how different this journey feels compared to the person I once was. That earlier version of me believed happiness would appear once everything in life was finally organized, predictable, secure. Now I understand something far more powerful. Life will always remain uncertain. Yet within that uncertainty, there is incredible beauty. Because every new experience offers another opportunity to grow, to understand yourself more deeply, to strengthen your resilience, to develop compassion for both yourself and others. And somewhere along this ongoing journey, you realize something quietly profound. The light you were searching for in the world was never separate from you. It was always waiting inside your awareness, growing stronger each time you chose understanding over fear, acceptance over resistance, growth over self-doubt. Now you carry that light with you, not as something fragile, but as something steady, something earned through every step you have taken, every lesson you have learned, every moment you chose to keep moving forward. Wherever your path continues from here, that light moves with you, calmly illuminating the road ahead. So here we are now, standing at a quiet threshold you might not have noticed while walking through everything we explored together, because the journey was never really about fixing every thought or solving every emotional puzzle in your mind. It was about arriving at this simple realization that life has been waiting patiently for you to stop overanalyzing it long enough to finally live it. I remember the moment this truth settled inside me. It did not arrive through a dramatic breakthrough or some perfect moment of clarity. It came quietly, almost unexpectedly, after years of trying to control my thoughts, manage my emotions, understand every situation, protect myself from disappointment. The mind can become so busy trying to prevent pain that it forgets something important. Life is not meant to be managed like a fragile machine. It is meant to be experienced. You might have spent years inside your own mind, replaying conversations, questioning your decisions, wondering whether you said the wrong thing, whether people misunderstood you, whether you were somehow not enough. I know that place well. Overthinking can feel like responsibility. It can feel like intelligence. It can even feel like preparation. But the truth reveals itself slowly. Overthinking is often just fear wearing the mask of control. The mind believes that if it studies the past long enough, if it anticipates the future carefully enough, it will eventually eliminate uncertainty. Yet uncertainty is not a problem life is trying to solve. Uncertainty is the environment life exists within. Once you begin accepting that reality, something inside you begins to relax. You stop demanding guarantees from the future. You stop expecting yourself to predict every possible outcome. Instead, a quieter confidence starts growing inside you. Not the confidence that comes from knowing everything will go perfectly. The confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever happens. I remember noticing how much lighter my mind felt once I stopped trying to solve every emotional experience immediately. Some questions did not require answers right away. Some situations simply needed time to unfold. Some people were not meant to stay forever. Understanding this did not make life empty. It made life spacious. Suddenly there was room to breathe again. Room to notice small moments that anxiety once drowned out. The warmth of sunlight during a quiet morning. The calm of a deep breath when your thoughts finally slowed down. The quiet satisfaction of knowing you handled a difficult moment with more awareness than you would have in the past. Those moments may seem ordinary, yet they are the real evidence of your transformation. Because the person you are now is not the same person who once believed every emotion needed immediate resolution. You have learned to observe your thoughts without immediately believing them. You have learned that not every feeling requires a reaction. You have learned that protecting your peace sometimes means stepping away from situations that once drained your energy. Boundaries became clearer. Self-respect became stronger. Your identity slowly shifted from someone searching for validation to someone who understands their own value. That change does not always feel dramatic. In fact, it often happens quietly. One day you simply notice that certain opinions no longer affect you the same way. Someone else's criticism no longer echoes inside your mind for hours. A situation that once created anxiety now feels manageable. This is emotional resilience in its most authentic form. You are not immune to difficulty. You are simply no longer controlled by it. I often think about how strange it is that we spend so much of our lives trying to become a version of ourselves that will finally feel ready to live fully. We tell ourselves that once we fix our flaws, once we heal every wound, once we gain enough confidence, then we will finally begin living the life we want. But the truth is far simpler. Life begins the moment you stop waiting for perfect readiness. You may still carry fears. You may still have moments when old thought patterns attempt to return. Yet now you recognize those thoughts for what they are, temporary mental events, not permanent truths. That recognition changes everything. It gives you the freedom to move forward even when your mind feels uncertain. It allows you to take steps toward experiences you once avoided. It reminds you that growth never happens in the comfort of perfect control. Growth happens when you step into life despite the unknown. I want you to pause for a moment and consider everything you have already survived, every emotional storm you believed would last forever, every moment when you questioned whether you had the strength to continue. You are still here. That alone proves something powerful about you. The strength you were searching for was never missing. It was developing quietly through every challenge, every difficult conversation, every moment when you chose to keep moving forward even while your mind was full of doubt. Now the journey changes its direction. It is no longer about fixing yourself. It is about trusting yourself. Trusting that your awareness will guide your reactions. Trusting that your boundaries will protect your peace. Trusting that your emotional intelligence will help you navigate relationships with clarity. Most importantly, trusting that you are allowed to live your life without constantly seeking permission from your own fears. So wherever you go from here, remember something simple. You do not need to understand every moment before you can experience it. You do not need to silence every thought before you can enjoy peace. You do not need to become perfect before you can live fully. You only need to take the next step, and then another. So breathe. Lift your eyes from the noise of your thoughts. Step forward into the life that has been waiting patiently for you. Go and live. And now, after everything you and I have walked through together, a quiet truth begins to settle into the space between your thoughts. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a calm realization that the mind you once believed was your greatest obstacle has slowly become your greatest teacher. I can still remember the version of myself that believed clarity would arrive only after every thought was solved, every fear eliminated, every emotional scar completely healed. That version of me believed peace was waiting somewhere at the end of a long road of self-improvement. What I discovered instead was something far more powerful. Peace was never waiting at the end of the road. Peace was growing quietly with every step. You may notice now how the things that once overwhelmed you no longer hold the same power. The thoughts that once spiraled into hours of overanalysis now appear more like passing clouds. They still exist, yet they no longer control the entire sky of your mind. That shift did not happen because life suddenly became easier. It happened because you learned how to see your mind differently. You learned that thoughts are not commands. They are suggestions. You learned that emotions are not enemies. They are signals. You learned that anxiety often comes from the illusion that you must control every outcome before life unfolds. That illusion slowly dissolves when awareness enters the conversation. I remember realizing that emotional strength is not the ability to avoid pain. Emotional strength is the ability to remain grounded while experiencing it. The moment you stop resisting every uncomfortable feeling, something remarkable begins to happen. Your mind becomes less chaotic. Your reactions become more intentional. The constant pressure to prove your worth to the world starts fading into the background. That is where emotional independence begins, not in isolation from others, but in freedom from needing others to constantly validate your identity. The approval you once chased becomes less important because you now understand something deeper. Your value was never dependent on someone else's opinion. It was simply hidden beneath years of self-doubt, comparison, overthinking. Through awareness, you slowly reclaimed it. You learned to pause before reacting emotionally. You learn to observe the ego when it tries to defend itself through anger or insecurity. You learn to walk away from environments that drain your energy rather than trying to fix every broken dynamic around you. Boundaries stopped feeling selfish. They started feeling necessary. You also discovered something many people spend their entire lives avoiding: Growth carries grief. Not every relationship will follow you into the next version of your life. Some connections were built for the person you used to be, not the person you are becoming. Letting go of those attachments can feel painful at first. Yet within that space, something new begins forming. Your authentic self. A version of you that is less concerned with performing for acceptance and more focused on living with honesty. That transformation is rarely loud. It does not need an announcement. It shows up quietly in the way you handle conflict, the way you speak to yourself during difficult moments, the way you trust your intuition when something does not feel right. You begin choosing peace over approval. You begin choosing clarity over chaos. You begin choosing growth over comfort. I often think about how different life feels once this shift happens. The mind still produces thoughts. The world still presents challenges. Relationships still require effort. Yet there is a calm center inside you that remains steady through it all. That center is awareness. It allows you to experience happiness without clinging to it. It allows you to face sadness without believing it defines your life. It allows you to forgive without forgetting the lessons that strengthened your boundaries. That awareness becomes the quiet guide that helps you navigate every chapter of your life moving forward. If you are listening to these words right now, it means something important brought you here. Maybe curiosity, maybe emotional exhaustion, maybe the quiet hope that there is a better way to live than constantly battling your own thoughts. And now you know there is. Not through controlling every situation, not through becoming a perfect version of yourself, but through understanding your mind deeply enough that it no longer controls your peace. That journey does not end here. In many ways, it is only beginning. The more awareness you bring into your daily life, the more clearly you will see your patterns, your strengths, your potential for growth. Each day becomes another opportunity to practice presence, emotional discipline, self-respect. A life guided by awareness becomes lighter, more intentional, more peaceful. If this journey resonated with you, if something in these reflections helped you see your own mind with a little more clarity, then stay connected to this path of growth. Support the work that brings these conversations into the world. Take a moment to like, share, subscribe to CliffNote Chronicles for more mindset audiobooks that continue exploring the psychology of awareness, emotional strength, personal transformation. Because the truth is, the more people who understand their minds, the more peaceful the world quietly becomes. For now, take one slow breath. Notice the calm that exists beneath the noise of your thoughts. Carry that awareness with you as you step back into your life. And keep moving forward a little wiser, a little lighter, a little more free than before.